Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking some seriously dramatic and, honestly, pretty surprising territorial commands hidden right there in the ancient text of Deuteronomy chapter 2. We're talking strict rules of passage, legendary ancient giants, and the absolute brutal reality of ancient warfare. So let's just dive right into it. How exactly did ancient Israel choose its battles? When you really read through the source text, it becomes incredibly clear that this wasn't just some random, chaotic conquest. Not at all. The text reveals these incredibly strict, divinely mandated rules that dictated exactly who they had to leave completely alone and, well, who they were commanded to absolutely annihilate.
Section 1. The Wilderness Journey.
Because, before the battles, you've got to look at the waiting. The text drops us right into the context of a wandering people who are finally getting the divine green light to move forward. But man, getting to that green light took a remarkably long time. We're talking a staggering 38-year gap from the time they left Kadesh Barnea until they finally crossed the brook Zered. So why the massive wait? Well, the text explicitly tells us that an entire generation of the men of war literally had to be consumed and die out before the next generation could finally cross that brook and kick off their actual campaign.
Which brings us to Section 2. The Nations of Peace.
Now, you'd probably expect an immediate call to arms for this new generation, right? But the initial rules of engagement were actually the exact opposite. Those very first commands, they weren't about attacking at all. They were all about strict diplomacy and respecting existing borders. It's a brilliant illustration of the geopolitical map at the time. The Israelites bumped into Mount Seir, Moab, and Ammon. And because these specific nations were descendants of Esau and Lot, the divine command was crystal clear. Do not meddle with them and do not distress them. In fact, Israel was told to deal with the practical economic realities of the day. They were commanded to peacefully buy meat and water with actual money. Basically, they had to be good tourists. Why? Because the text states God had already given these specific lands to those nations as a possession.
All right, moving on to Section 3, the Ancient Giants.
Now, what's really interesting here is that right in the middle of all these peaceful diplomatic instructions, we get this sudden, super fascinating historical detour. There's this whole backstory embedded in the text about the previous inhabitants of these regions. Before Moab and Ammon even settled these borderlands, the lands were inhabited by people described as great, many, and tall. They're often compared to the legendary Anakims. The Moabites called them Emams, and the Ammonites called them Zamzummams. It's like the text is using these historical examples of giants being destroyed and displaced to establish a pattern, mirroring exactly what Israel was gearing up to do in their own promised possession.
And that leads us to Section 4. War with King Sihon.
Because, yeah, that peaceful diplomacy we just talked about, it definitely doesn't last forever. We move abruptly from, politely buying water and swapping giant lore straight into dramatic total war. Let's walk through exactly how this escalation happened, step by step. Step 1. Israel actually sent messengers of peace to Sihon, the Amorite king of Heshbon. They offered him the exact same peaceful trade deal they just gave Esau and Moab. They literally just wanted to buy food and pass through on the highway. But step 2, Sihon flat out refuses. The text states that his spirit was hardened and his heart made obstinate, specifically so that he could be delivered into Israel's hands. And that leads directly to step 3, a massive battle at Jahaz, which culminates in step 4, the absolute complete destruction of his cities.
And the text really does not shy away from the sheer brutality of this conquest. It reads, and I quote, "And we took all his cities at that time and utterly destroyed the men and the women and the little ones. Of every city, we left none to remain." The scale here is genuinely shocking. From Aroer to Gilead, there was absolutely no mercy for the human inhabitants. The Israelites kept only the cattle and the spoil of the cities for themselves.
So we're looking at a text of massive, massive extremes here. We go from strict commands to politely buy water and respect historical borders straight into a sudden, devastating, total war of annihilation against an obstinate king. So what does this sudden shift reveal to you about ancient rules of conquest and divine mandates? It's a pretty heavy duality to chew on, isn't it? Thank you so much for joining me today to unpack this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.